Today I'm going to show you a wonderful toe-up sock method. A friend and one of the best knitters that I know taught me this. If you like knitting socks on looms, look for my book. Socks of all sorts for knitting looms, with socks for all sizes, all gauges, tons of styles, oodles of great techniques. Today I'm going to show you a very cool toe-up sock method that's almost foolproof. And the reason I'm working on this little bitty loom right now is to show you what an I-cord truly is, because this method starts with I-cord. I-cord is short for idiot cord, meaning you'll do it long enough, you'll feel like an idiot. It's very, very repetitive. This loom we go round and round, and you notice there's no break in the yarn. So you end up with a complete tube. The reason I want to show you what real I-cord is because you don't have to actually use it. I'm going to use mock I-cord, and I will show you that in a minute. It works just as well. In case you want to know about this little loom, the history of this kind of loom is a spool loom. But I made a bunch of these to teach young girls on. These are very cheap and easy to make. And the instructions are in my video series. It's a playlist called Kid Stuff. So you can make one of these and make I-cord if you want. Here's what I'm actually going to use. In fact, it is a skinny strip of normal stockinette knitting. But it naturally rolls, and it will allow us to treat it like I-cord. I've purposely knitted it a little bit loosely because I will be wanting to pick up stitches this way and hang them on the loom. You don't even have to make it on the loom you're going to use, and it need not be the same yarn, but it should be similar in weight. The absolute minimum it could be is 4 stitches wide, but I don't recommend going that skinny. It's much easier to work with it if it's a little wider. I made mine 10 stitches wide, and I think I mentioned I knitted it a little loosely to make it easy to pick up. So let's do that. I've set up this loom with 56 pegs for a sock, and the toe only goes on half of them. So we're going to go down this side and across this end, and that will be the toe half. And here we are hanging pieces from the I-cord onto the loom. You do not have to pick up the next stitch in line. We're actually hanging rows, not stitches. Try to hang only one strand. I'm trying to keep my other hand out of your way and still be able to use it a little bit. There we go. I knitted my I-cord a little bit extra long so that it would be easy. I could ease it in. Let me try another angle for you to get a different look. I made about a foot of I-cord for 2 reasons. One, you can see that the sock is bigger on the loom than it is in real life. It's stretched out a little bit. But nobody's sock toe is actually a foot. I wanted to be able to ease in as needed, plus have a tail hanging down at each end, just because that keeps it out of the way. Here we're coming up to the corner. I should point out something about my loom setup here. This is a Kiss loom, and they are all straight. There are no round ones because of the way they're made so that we can adjust. Whoops. Easily redone, though. So the corners on a square loom would be difficult to get to. But if you offset, as I have done, where the excess of one board sticks out one side and the other on the other side, you have much clearer access to the knitting on both ends. Now here we are coming around. So I'll go hang the rest of this off camera and we'll get back together and start on the toe itself. Here it is. There is a pretend stitch on every peg, but these stitches won't be part of the work. The orange is functioning like waste yarn. It will come off later and it can be reused. I didn't take any particular trouble that I was getting only one column of stitches. If I had picked up this strand instead of the one that I did hang, it would not have mattered because this isn't part of the project. It's a placeholder for now. And that's why it also didn't matter that I eased it in so that each stitch was comfortably loose, rather than making sure that I had a specific amount of the cord used, as it would matter in a real project. For row number 1, this is also not part of the project. It's going to separate our waste yarn from our main yarn. So I am going to knit it like a normal row. This is an FG1 Kiss Loom. So I go in front of the peg, behind the next pin over, which is that one, in front, behind, all the way around. And then I can either stop every so often or even every peg and knit over, or I can wrap the whole row and knit it over, whatever works better for you. So I will go around and finish this row and just leave ends of this particular yarn dangling at each end. This one's going to pull out of the project eventually. So there we are. The white contrasts nicely with the apricot colored yarn, and that is not an accident. That's a very good idea that will make life easier. I have the ends of the I-cord and the ends of the white yarn dangling down below, keeping out of the way the best way we can. Now we're going to do a trick. In the United States, these are called bobby pins. They may be sold as hairpins elsewhere, and you may use these or anything somewhat similar that will do the job. Some people use a safety pin for every stitch. They're not really part of the project either. They're going to allow us to put a handle on each stitch on the first row. Beginning my first row of main yarn, it's the red yarn. Of course, this first stitch will try to grow because there's a loose yarn tail. I just have to tighten it up. Okay, this first row is actually a normally knitted row, but it goes a little bit slowly because we're wanting to hang a pin in each of the stitches. So it goes like this. Knit a stitch in the normal method. Now take one of the bobby pins and insert it into that stitch. There's more than one way to get it in there. I'm finding it easiest for me to open it up, slide it in from here. It may enlarge the stitch, that's okay. Then flip it to the inside. If you are using a kiss, make sure you do not accidentally go around the pin in the wrong way, or the work will hang up. Also, on all looms, make sure you don't twist the stitch, and make sure the bobby pin gets to the other side of the yarn, not the side where you're knitting on. See, I'm ready with this red yarn to go on to the next stitch now. Let's do that again another time or two. Set up the stitch, knit it over, find a bobby pin. It may help you to spread it a little bit and hold it open with your fingers. It does help me. Pop it into the stitch. Lift it around to the back. Make sure the yarn is on the correct side. We don't want an impediment between the working yarn and the next peg. Tighten up the stitch if it loosened up. The pins are going to have two functions for us. One is what you're seeing. They're spacing the size of the stitches because we want these stitches to be even and neat, but on the other hand, they're going to need to be lifted up over a set of pegs in a little while, and we don't want them to be overly tight because of that. Tighten up and ready to move on. And as the row gets knitted, the number of bobby pins will grow. As I practice, I'm finding that I can do 3 stitches at a time and make it a little bit speedier. You probably know that I'm not somebody who thinks speed is of the essence when knitting. We do it mainly for fun. However, we don't want it to be so tedious we're ready to scream. In certain processes like this one, it's nice to find efficient ways. So there are 3 stitches. Now they all need pins in them. When done in batches, the first few don't need you to worry about where the main yarn is because it's already past them. On the other hand, small batches such as 3 are small enough that if the stitch size needs to adjust to accommodate the bobby pin, it still can a little bit. It's also few enough that it will stretch on you and you need to tighten it back up if it needs to be tightened. We don't need it sloppy, just loose enough to lift later. And let's get this on the other side of the yarn and ready to go again. Row 1 of the toe is knitted. This will actually end up being either on the top of the foot at the base of the toe or the bottom of the foot at the base of the toe. We have a bobby pin in place for every single stitch. That one is trying to lay funny, but it's there. Do you have to use bobby pins to use an I-cord? No, you do not. You could treat it just the way I treated the waist yarn cast on in my video in the Loom Knitters documentaries on starting with waist yarn for toe up, in which case you'll end up having to locate each of this first row of stitches by eye to hang it. The time invested in hanging these pins is supposed to be saved when we go to hang these stitches on this other side of the loom, which will happen after we knit the toe. So it's a trade-off. They'll be easier to find then because you spent time to put them in now. At this point, we simply begin knitting the toe normally. I like short-rowed toes, and it's a good style to use with this, so that is what I will do. Here I'm coming around. Shaping a toe goes like this. It's on half of the pegs already. Then every single row, one knits one fewer of the pegs, so the rows get shorter and shorter. After you've gone into the point you want to, usually 1/3 of the pegs remaining with knit stitches knitting, you go out the other way, making every row get longer and longer again. There are multiple methods to take care of this matter to avoid holes. One is to wrap and turn, meaning that before I knit back, I will wrap this peg, then turn and go back, knitting the other direction, but I won't knit this off. That keeps a hole from forming. Another one is a German short row, which is my preferred method, and I will show you that in a moment as soon as I knit these over. You must expect the first row after the pins to be harder to knit over and require more care than most rows. As soon as those pins are out of the way, the knitting will feel completely normal. But you can see them responding as I tug on the yarn to knit over. Now I have 28 pegs working, and I would short row down to a third of that, and you will notice right away there is no obvious third out of 28. But that's okay. I can do approximately a third. In my case, knowing how my feet are shaped, what I will probably do is short row for 20 rows. To begin knitting back with German short rows, I take the working yarn, assess which peg just knitted, it's the one with my fingertip is on, pull the yarn back around it, creating something called a double stitch in German. See how it's sort of doubling up here? There's better video of this on my video about German short rows for looms, which shows it on many kinds of looms. And then I start back the other way. Your choice of short rowing technique does not at all matter with reference to whether you use the I-cord and the bobby pins. It's just that I know since you're watching, you're going to want to know. But the details about this are thoroughly covered in another video. So I am going to short row in for 20 rows, short row out for 20 rows, and then we'll hang this toe together. Okay, complete toe. There's the little pouch where the tip of my toe will go. Each stitch has a handle on it. You can see our I-cord coming out from underneath by now. And that's what it looks like from another view. Now I'm going to push some of our little handles up, our bobby pins, and make sure I pick the one at the very end and hang it on the first peg. Then the next one goes on the next peg. And so on around. Expect them to feel a little tight. And make sure that you're not twisting the stitch. I'm trying to see how to show you. The stitch needs to stay oriented in the way it was knitted. Otherwise it'll make a messy spot at the toe, plus it'll be even harder to hang. Sometimes you kind of have to tug and adjust to get one up there. Some parts of the loom are tougher than others. Now you're going to end up with all these bobby pins on the outside, and you can start taking them off. Doing the taking off a little along will take a little bit of stress off of the yarn, just because the space the pins take up is no longer consumed with the pins. Make absolutely sure to pick them up in order. Wiggle each one onto a peg. Almost got that one out of order, which you don't want to do. There, they're sorted back out. At this point on the loom, it gets a little easier for a bit. The stitches have to stretch different distances because we're making the shape of a human toe, but we're knitting it on a rectangle. Which one of you guys is next? It's the one that's underneath, of course. There we go. That one tried to twist. Got to watch for it. You really don't want a twisted stitch in your toe. By this point, I'm running out of room to keep reaching down for pins, so I stopped and I pushed them all to the top, being careful not to drop any stitches. And we'll keep going. At the corner, it gets to feeling a bit tight again. Come on, you stitch, behave yourself. Aha! It was twisted a whole turn. No wonder it gave me trouble. This is probably the result of me reaching under to pull the pins up. They may have flipped when that happened. So that's something to look out for. And if we did this right, we'll have the same number of pins as we do pegs. And here we go. We did. Yay! Time to get the rest of these bobby pins out. And at this point, you simply begin knitting in the round, knitting the number of rows you need for the foot of whatever size sock you're making. And the toe is closed. You are completely and totally done with the toe. Later, we will be able to pull out the nylon cord, which is the white one in my case, and it will release the I cord, which we can use later over and over to do this job every time we need it. So you just find your yarn end and continue knitting round and round, whichever direction it is you like. Now let's talk about when we get to the heel. I used these pegs to knit my toe. If I use them to knit my heel, the closure of the toe where I hung the new stitches will end up on top of my foot. If I choose to use these instead, which is less traditional, but it's really your choice, it doesn't ruin anything, then the hung area will end up on the bottom of my foot. Let's pretend my hand is my foot and my fingertips are my toes. You can see how that works. If my toes are in there now, the stitches I just hung will end up on top of my toes if my heel over here is knitted here. Now, I did something I did not tell you about while I was doing it because I wasn't absolutely sure it was going to work. The majority of sock yarns have some stretch. This is not an official sock yarn, and it does not have any stretch, nor is it all wool. This is an acrylic yarn, a nice one, but it's not as inherently stretchy as woolen yarn is. I normally use wool and use yarn with a stretchy fiber added. So this has the least stretch I would ever work with, and it did work. It was a job, but it works. Therefore, if you're using regular sock yarn, which is usually made with the idea of sock qualities in mind, so it tends to be strong and resilient and very often has a little bit of stretch, you will have an even easier time than you saw me have. At this point, I'm going to knit a few rows so our work comes on down and show you how to remove your I-cord for reuse another time. I took my toe off the loom because I'm not really going to knit a whole sock with this, but you can see the toe shape, and here's where our first row of nylon cord is that we knitted into, and here is where the I-cord was hung. Now, if I had used the ideal kind of nylon cord, it would be strong enough and slippery enough that I could just pull it out now. I didn't have that to work with, so I just used a thin piece of yarn, and it turns out it's not strong and slippery enough, so I'll have to pick it out stitch by stitch, or a couple at a time. But as I do, you'll see it'll just release the other knitting and release the I-cord, and that'll be ready for another use. You can already see something See the loops that have been pulled up on the I-cord? That's actually not a bad thing. It just means that it'll be easier to hang the next time. When this comes off, at first it will have marked the stitches a little bit, but we'll just give it a lengthwise tug and get rid of those marks. You can also release it from this thing. Last stitch pulled out. There's the mark where it was. Here's the knitting after a little bit of adjusting. And if this were a real sock yarn, more resilient and a little stretchier, it would disappear even more nicely.